Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Nathan Aguinaga. Nathan returns to the Success Insight podcast to chat about his latest book, Wake Up, You're Having Another Nightmare. This is the third and final installment of his three-book series describing his military and civilian life. Now, Nathan first joined us with episode 13 this year when he introduced us to Division Life on Ardennes Street about his 10 years experience in the 82nd Airborne Division. He joined us again for episode number 50 when he introduced us to roster number 50, which was about his personal experiences from beginning to end of attending the toughest combat leadership course in the military, the U.S. Army Ranger School. And now, in Wake Up, You're Having Another Nightmare, Nathan writes about the personal experiences of he and his wife in dealing with his post-traumatic stress disorder that he was diagnosed with while serving his last year of a 25-year career in the U.S. Army. Nathan, welcome back to the Success Insight podcast.
Hi, Howard. Thanks for having me back. It's good to be back with you and your listeners again. Thanks again.
It is our pleasure. And, I have to say, 3 books in a year. This is like unbelievable. I mean, George R.R. Martin should be taking lessons from you on how to finish the Game of Thrones series. So I have a question, and it's right at the top of my head. Is you've got these 3 books. You've painted for us, for our listeners, this journey of you going into the military. I mean, it's something you've wanted to be a part of through your earliest days. And so you're in the 82nd Airborne Division, you're a graduate of U.S. Army Ranger School, and now you're in this last installment, Wake Up, You're Having Another Nightmare. I have to ask, is this whole effort of writing these 3 books, has this been a little bit of a therapeutic endeavor for you?
Actually, it has. That's a good question. Excellent question. Yeah, actually, it really has been. But I'll also tell you this, with this latest installment, I never planned on writing this. And like I explained in the beginning of the book, in the introduction portion, I never wanted to write this. I never expected to write this. And what happened was when I finished roster number 50, my daughter, she's a senior in college at Bowling Green State University here in Northwest Ohio. She was over visiting us at the house one day. And I finished roster number 50. I believe it was like last winter. And she's the one that actually convinced me, hey, Dad, why don't you write about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD? And I'm like, I said, I don't want to write that. I said, how do you write a book like that? What am I going to write about? And she goes, Dad, just tell your stories like you're doing for your other autobiographies, your other memoirs. Add into it and just make it happen. She goes, a lot of academia, a lot of professors would and probably could want to use it as curriculum for their students. I said, that might just work. So I thought about it, and it took me just a little bit. And I said, you know what? There are other gaps in Division Life on Ardennes Street, the first installment. I said, there are other gaps that I can fill in because, and I'll give your listeners an example. When I wrote Division, I specifically did not write detailed combat patrols when I was in Iraq. I left that open, not because I was planning on writing a book to fill the gaps in, but because I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to go take myself back in, because any author will know when you write a story, you have to take yourself back into that situation. And I didn't want to do that. Writing this book took me about 5 months to complete because there were days where I didn't want to go back into those stories. And I want your listeners to know also, this is not a dark, scary book or anything like that. I add humor to everything that I do. So there's also humorous points in it. And it's basically other stories that complete Division Life on Ardennes Street. And that's basically how I go with it. But I go into detail about some of the combat stories, time as a drill sergeant, time in Hurricane Katrina relief. And then also I go into detail of counseling sessions post-military after my retirement, where we talk directly with counseling and group counseling with other veterans, the global war on terrorism, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. And I go into detail with that. So yes.
Okay. So for our listeners and for my benefit, the words post-traumatic stress disorder, I first learned of these words as I was growing up and being safe at home, watching what's transpiring during the Vietnam War. However, for our listeners now, could you describe for them, for me, what is post-traumatic stress?
Post-traumatic stress disorder, as I was taught by the psychiatrist in the Army when I first was diagnosed with this in 2009, and I describe this also in the introduction and the beginning chapters, having to deal with stresses when you feel or an individual feels that their life could be taken at any time, such as combat, first responders, firefighters, children, maybe perhaps even, unfortunately, abused children can go through this, abused people in general, car accidents. So it's not just based off of military or war and all that. And another thing too is when your listeners read this book, they'll understand that I don't just talk about combat. I talk about experiences with other soldiers where I would yell and holler. And the majority of my post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'll tell you, I'll go into this perhaps here on this podcast, but the reason why I got diagnosed or I even went to the mental health facility when I was in the Army, it was basically off of nightmares. And I was having severe nightmares. And my wife, actually, God bless her, she would get up and she would go to the opposite end of the room. And I also explained this in the introduction. She would go to the opposite end of the room and then she would holler out my name to wake me up. And, she's the one that convinced me primarily to go seek counseling at the Fort Riley, my last duty station, Fort Riley's mental health facility, where actually I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder within the first 45 minutes of me even being there.
When you were first experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, or perhaps it was your wife, when she was first experiencing you having some issues, how far back was it in your career and how long did it kind of stick around for you and your wife until that moment in time when she says, you need to go see one of the specialists on base?
Well, I explained this to you and your listeners in my first podcast. I was previously married to my children's mother. And basically, we started noticing the same effects back in 2004 when I came back from my first tour in Iraqi freedom, I should say, because I was also in Desert Storm in 1990, 1991. But the nightmares and the anxiety and all that was really occurring in 2004. But Howard, I got to be honest with you and your listeners. Back in 2004, 2005, maybe even 2006, when you were a leader in the military, especially in the infantry, you didn't go to mental health. If you did that, you would lose your duty position, especially in the infantry, with weapons and all that stuff. So it was kind of one of those situations where, you just kept it within your family internally. And that was actually happening a lot. The numbers of DUIs and alcohol related incidences increased, and I'm not saying just in my particular unit, but this was happening Army wide, military wide, I should say, Marine Corps, Air Force, Navy. To answer your question, it was roughly after I got back from my first tour in Operation Iraqi Freedom, but it wasn't until 2009 when my current wife at the time had convinced me to go seek counseling. And she even went with me to my first visit. And actually, we were going together to the psychiatrist there at Fort Riley. But the convincing part was at that point, I already knew I was retiring. Like I had already, I was at 19 years in time in service at the time. And I knew I was going to retire. So I had the kind of the mentality of, what do I have to lose? I might as well just go, I'm getting ready to get out, pretty much. Not at that time. I still had a year left.
Right. So I'm curious, and maybe, jump forward. It's 2020, at least in the military. Is it still a cultural norm that if we are struggling, that we keep it to ourselves? Or is there any type of openness to, going to your commanding officer and requesting some type of assistance? Or is it still part of the culture?
Great question. No, it is accepted now and actually required for screening purposes, especially coming back from a combat tour. It's a mandatory requirement screening process that every service member has to go through. Soldiers are encouraged if there's problems or issues, especially in their households, that they need to go seek help, and they're encouraged to do so. So my point was in the last conversation was basically back in those days, especially when I was an infantry platoon sergeant, going to mental health period, no matter if it were for anger management or whatever, being in combat arms, a soldier or a service member could possibly, and the fear was there, that the soldier or the service member could possibly lose their duty position, especially if you were a senior leader like I was at the time. But nowadays, no, it's encouraged. Psychiatry has really gotten, especially for the global war on terrorism, since 9/11, they've really come a long way. And my hat's off to the military and to the psychiatrists and the counselors and the doctors, and even the leadership at the unit level. The non-commissioned officers and the officers within the platoons and the squads, they really understand, and they talk to their soldiers, and they talk more about helping them and getting them through whatever situation it may be. It could be as much as drinking alcohol excessively, maybe possibly even drug abuse in some cases, but mostly, soldiers having anger issues, road rage, and in my case, particularly, was nightmares. And that's what's cool about the title of the book, which I'm sure we'll get into if you want to ask me about that. But the title of the book, I had a problem with that. I was like, what do I call it? I was asking my wife. I was like, okay, I'm writing this. I said, what do I name it? And she's like, well, how about Nathan, wake up, you're having another nightmare? Because that's what I tell you 2 to 3 times a week for the last 12, 13 years we've been married,
Wow. And it's actually a really good segue, because let's get into the book. And, how did you start to construct this book? And I'm interested in that, and, who the audience is for the book, and how will this help either could be aspiring soldiers or, aspiring civilians? I mean, I have no doubt, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's going to be, that train has left the station. It's on the way from all of the first responders, especially with COVID-19. We have the children down in the camps at the southern border, taken away from their parents. And so there's some trains that are coming to town. We just don't know when. How is this book going to be constructed, and how is this going to help folks that need to understand this topic?
Well, from my perspective, it's going to inspire and help those first responders, to include, obviously, military family members and their spouses and their children, family households as a whole, basically. And the reason I say that too is this book is special to me, because I also have my wife. She did an excerpt on it, and she actually wrote her own chapter on being a family member dealing with some of the issues that she has dealt with me. And so this book, and I'm being humorous right now. I call this, when I come home and after I finish, I tell my wife, I say, this is the masterpiece, because this here, not only was it difficult for me to write, but it was one of the most difficult challenges that I had in my life to write this book. And so I call it the masterpiece. My wife actually put a pretty large chapter in there. And my wife, and I explained this in the introduction, she has experience with dealing with this, because her father is a Vietnam veteran who served 3 tours in Vietnam. And to this day, he still has to sleep with a nightlight on. And she also has friends, because she used to be in the Army as well. She was stationed in Germany, and her best friend from Germany, who she's still good friends with today, she served in Iraq twice, 3 times maybe. She could tell that her personality had changed as well, to include her brother as well. This is going to go out, and it's going to benefit, I think, to let soldiers know and military members know, hey, you're not alone, okay? Because there's thousands of us. I mean, thousands. And out of those thousands, there's other hundreds, maybe even thousands more that won't and refuse, especially senior leaders, that will not seek help or counseling or something to that effect. And they're out there. And then, of course, like I said, and I explain this in my acknowledgments at the end of the book, I say to first responders, and I acknowledge them, firefighters and police officers, and you name it, children, whatever the case may be. And I explain all that. So and also, like I said, academia, professors, school teachers, psychology teachers could really benefit off this. And like I said, could even possibly use this as curriculum for their students. I write my books, all 3 of my books, I write them like I'm talking to you right now, minus the curse words.
That's okay. That's okay. You can throw a couple in there if you want. So I'm curious, Nathan. I mean, the first books, Life on Ardennes Street, and then roster number 50. This is a book that's definitely geared towards, the reader who's interested in military life, perhaps has been part of the Army in the 82nd Airborne Division. Maybe they were in Ranger School there. They had a spouse, a loved one, parent in Ranger School. This book is a little different. It seems that, there's, again, it's part of your life. You've lived it, you're sharing it, but there's more to be offered up here for general use and consumption. And I'm wondering, the individuals who have read the book, perhaps that have not been in the military, what's been their reaction to it?
Well, the release date hasn't even come around yet. It doesn't get released until November 30th, but it's available now for pre-sales on Amazon. Those who have not served in the military, they will be able to appreciate and understand, because it's kind of a mystery, especially to a lot of my friends and relatives, that they know that at times I might want to just be alone and not hang out, or, I might have some sort of anxiety situations. And this book will bring out and make them or help them to understand who I am. And I think a lot of people, especially here in my hometown here in Northwest Ohio, North Baltimore, by the way, I got to put a shout out. A lot of the individuals, my friends and family or friends that live here, will help them understand who I am. And I think a lot of them expected to get a lot of this information from reading Division. But what I intended in Division was not to talk about too much about divorce or this or that. My point was to talk about daily life in the 82nd Airborne Division, period, and just leave it at that. But like I said, originally, I never intended to write this book. And I didn't leave the chapter of Iraq in Division, because like I said, I talk about getting there. And then I fast forward and I talk about leaving. But I didn't do that because I intended to write this. I did that because I didn't really want to talk or confront it. And that's how I start the book, Howard. I open it up by stating, in order for me to write this book, I had to convince myself that not only do I have to be honest with the readers, but I have to be honest with myself first. And that's how I open the book, the introduction portion.
You commented earlier that your daughter had a little bit of an influence during the conversation of what's next. And what has been their reaction, your kids' reaction to this latest book? And I realize too, and for our listeners, the book is scheduled to be published November 30th, is it, Nathan?
Yes, November 30th.
Excellent. So what has been their reaction to the book about Dad?
Well, my kids understand. My kids remember all through the days of, growing up, that I would have, road rage from time to time. And who doesn't nowadays? I can't really blame that on post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, it just, but who doesn't, especially when you're driving on the highway and you see somebody with a cell phone in their hand and they're going over across the lines and all this stuff, it's stuff like that. But no, the only true person that really gets it in my life, because I don't talk about it too much, my counselor at the VA and my wife, particularly my wife, because she has to sleep with me. And she, to this day, still wakes me up, maybe twice, 3 times a week. Hey, Nate, wake up. You're having another nightmare. Because she'll hear me cursing and I'll be muffling, I'll be cursing in my sleep or whatever the case may be. And a lot of it, like I say in the book, a lot of it doesn't necessarily have to do with combat situations. A lot of it has to do with me yelling at soldiers to get the job done, to get from point A to point B, because when you serve 20 years in that capacity, in that environment, it'll never leave you. It'll be in your mind for the rest of your life. At least it will for me. I'm convinced. My kids, they're going to support this. They haven't read it, obviously, but to be honest with you, I'm waiting for the hard copies to come from my publisher so I can sign and give a copy.
So you didn't give the transcript over to, well, maybe to your wife already, but to your kids and say, okay, this is what Dad's writing. Let me know what you think. I mean, you didn't do that.
No, I did it for my wife. And like I said, she participated in it as well. But for the kids, no, this is going to be a big surprise for them. They're going to be excited once they see this because it's going to answer a lot of questions. I don't just talk about my military experience. I go into the divorce phase. And so, like I said, I think the book that my friends and family thought they were going to read with Division, the first one, I think this is the one that's going to answer a lot of their questions of who Nathan Aguinaga is, how I became who I am today. But like I said, I got so many friends and I'm just a happy-go-lucky person. the main thing I have problems with is my nightmares, and I get a little upset on the road when I drive. But who doesn't? Who doesn't, Howard?
Yeah. Well, hey, just in the spirit of full disclosure, I actually voted today in Nevada for the first time. I'm on the exit right before where my apartment is, and I'm literally at the light. And this woman just ran right into my rear end. I mean, she tapped
my
it.
Lord.
She just tapped it, but myself and then the guy behind her boxed her in until the police arrived. But like, oh my God, this is all I need.
I tell my kids, because my kids are adults now. My daughter's a senior in college, and my son has just graduated high school last semester. And I've been telling them since they had their driver's license, I said, you have to be literally on the offense or the defense when you're driving these days. Obviously you have to drive safe yourself, but you have to look out for the other people. I mean, it's getting bad.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. And that's why I don't go anywhere near the Las Vegas Strip, because I don't know what the person in the car, what state they are in. So Nathan, I've got a question now with the 3 books, and, very well received, books 1 and 2. And I've no doubt your latest book, Wake Up, You're Having a Nightmare, is going to be well received. What's going to be next for you in terms of what you're going to do as a result of being an accomplished author? Is there speaking? Is there different kinds of teaching that's in store for you? What are your thoughts on that? What does the future hold?
Okay, so our last podcast with roster number 50, you had asked me jokingly, you were like, well, who would you want to play you in a movie role?
Yeah.
And I didn't have an answer because I don't know a lot of the young actors' age these days, But I tell you what, I really want to pursue finding a movie producer or somebody that's involved in the movie business. I don't know if you know anybody or off of LinkedIn or something to that effect, because I really would love to mail these 3 books to somebody that could, because I really truly believe that these 3 books would make an excellent 2.5 hour excellent movie. Because, and I'll give you two main reasons why. Number one, there's no current movies about the 82nd Airborne Division today. I think, the last one that was made was called A Bridge Too Far, and that was made in the late 70s, and that was based off of, World War II. My second reason is I go into detail about Hurricane Katrina relief, and there are no movies that I know of. There are no movies that represent the true horror effect of what happened down there in New Orleans. I swear, I don't think there is one. And I describe in Division, I have an entire chapter in Division about Katrina. In this book, I go into more detail. And I don't think your listeners or a lot of people, unless they were from that area, really understand the horror that a lot of us saw, rescuers, what we saw on the streets in the continental United States. And I write in detail about that in the Division and in this latest book.
Very good. Very good. Well, listen, I will make it a point to make some introductions for you. One of the benefits of having this podcast, and by the way, you were number 50 when you did roster number 50 with us. Well, we are, I think you're going to be real close to our 100th episode. Maybe I should just save you for number 100. And so that'll be a cool milestone for this year. But, we've come across some screenwriters and script writers. So let's see if we can make a couple introductions for you. It'd be our pleasure. And what else would you want to share about this journey, this, 20-something year journey that you have been on, and where you're at today? Is there anything you would want to leave, some insights that you want to leave with our listeners?
Yeah. One of the main aspects or inspirations that I would like to leave with your listeners is primarily life itself is worth waking up for every day. Nothing is bad enough in life where you want to get out of it. You want to leave this world. It's not worth it. So if you're having issues or problems day to day, and that could be as simple as mine, like having nightmares nightly, daily, or, anxiety issues, depression, whatever the case may be, talk to somebody. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a clinical counselor or you can call somebody, talk to a friend, talk to a relative, talk to your kids, somebody. because life is worth it every day. I wake up every day and I say life is worth waking up for every day. And basically that's my message.
Fantastic. And we do appreciate that insight. And I'm sure our listeners will do so as well. Nathan, if our listeners or anybody that's coming across this podcast would like to learn more about you, who you are, your writing, where are the best places for them to go?
Please go to www.aguinaga, AGUINAGA.com. And on there, I have direct links to Amazon for the books, all three of them. And I also have direct links to my Facebook, my Twitter account, and my LinkedIn. And they can go directly to my profile through my website. And I encourage and I invite anybody who wants to be my friend just to come on there and learn more about me. That's basically the main way to contact me. Also, anybody that wants to buy my books or anything, they can go directly to Kohler Books, my publishing company. Yes.
Fantastic. And we'll most definitely provide the links back to your site and aguinaga.com. And we'll have the links to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and to Kohler. Nathan, it's been an absolute pleasure to get to know you over the course of this year. And really, 3 books, that is entirely phenomenal. I have, for the sake of a better word, nightmares of just having to get one out. This podcasting is much easier, let me tell you. But we all have to have, areas that we're, playing our comfort zones and challenges. So really, it's just been a pleasure to get to know you and to see your work, how you've progressed, and really, I'm just really anxious and looking forward to, having a look at, Wake Up, you're having another nightmare, and just, we want to wish you the, much success through the rest of this year or last 2 months of 2020, and really a healthy and prosperous 2021 and beyond to you and your family. So thank you again.
Well, thank you very much, Howard. Thanks for having me. And to all your listeners out there, it's been a pleasure communicating with all you all. I hope everybody stays safe out there and practice, the social distancing, and, we'll get through all this, and we're going to make it. It's too easy.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Nathan Aguinaga. He's returning to the Success Insight podcast to chat about his latest book, Wake Up, You're Having Another Nightmare. This is the 3rd and final installment of his 3-book series describing his military and post-military civilian life, and really just a phenomenal achievement. 3 books published in 2020. And we do hope you go out there, whether it's on his website at aguinaga.com or out to Amazon. And we're going to provide a link back to Wake Up, as well as roster number 50 and Life Division, Life on Ardennes Street. We'll provide the links back to Amazon there as well, and to Kohler Books site, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And really, just what a really interesting story. And just imagine growing up and you're in your teens and thinking, I want to be in the military. And that's exactly what Nathan did. And it's been an absolute pleasure for him to share that journey with us on Success Insight. So folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. And as Nathan said, be good to yourself, be good to your family, practice social distancing, wear a mask, and we will get through this. So folks, see you on the next episode of the Success Insight podcast. But before you do, and I can't forget this, you got to visit us at successinsightpodcast.com. We're also on Facebook and on LinkedIn. We have our Success Insight podcast pages there, as well as the major podcasting platforms: Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, and we are also on YouTube as well. So cannot forget to give you that information. And listen, if you enjoy this particular episode with Nathan, or perhaps the previous episodes 13 and 50 that we recorded with Nathan this year, let us know what you think, or any of the other episodes. We want to hear what you have to say. Okay, go out there, have a phenomenal day, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Success Insight podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.